Hello. Okay. So, what does Loretta Ross mean by calling people in versus calling people out? So, when you call somebody out, you have a different opinion than them, or you see they did something wrong, or you don't agree with what they did, or something that happened in their past, and you call them out, basically, or like she said, our cancel culture that exists very popular nowadays and is always active, targeting a certain person, or targeting another group of people, but it's very common nowadays. And with calling people out, the one main goal of it is to either have that person humiliated and just shown in the light, like this person is did this and they're super wrong, and everybody just see that, and stop, and and just shame on them, basically. But with this, um, there's no end goal but uh, humiliation, and it's just like I think of it, a fight of opinions. But with calling people in, instead of sorry, instead of um, wanting to invite them to a fight of opinions, you are instead curious in why they would do that, why they would think that way. So instead of saying, "Oh, what you did is wrong," or "Why would you do that?" Instead of doing that, you can ask them, "Well, why do you think that way? Well, why do you have that opinion? Or tell me more why you think like that, or explain to me." Or it's just being curious in why they would do that, think that way, and that way you can have a conversation with them and see why they think that way, and maybe understand them, or they can understand why you think a different way. Why does Ross believe calling people in can be more effective than calling them out? Well, as I just said, calling people in opens an opportunity for growth. You know, if let's say they did something wrong, and there's no chance you'll think that same way, and they are wrong, and they should know they're wrong. Instead of calling them out and telling them that was super wrong, that was super wrong. You should be ashamed. You should be canceled. You should be off the internet. You should, shame on you. Instead of doing that, you ask them, why did you do that? What made you think that you should do that? Or if they posted something, why do you think that way? And when you do that, that opens an opportunity for them for growth, for to think back on what they did, and to change their minds, their opinions, or the way they think, or maybe see their point of view. This way, you can have an open conversation with them, and most importantly, there's an opportunity for growth for both parties. Sorry. What are the potential consequences of a culture focused on calling out? Well, as I just said earlier, the cancel culture, which is basically just calling people out. Whenever somebody messes up, people dig into that person's past, they find something they don't like, and they call them out. Like, let's say a celebrity did something really messed up in the past 10 years ago, before they became popular. People will call them out and tell them, "Oh, look at this, you did this 10 years ago. How can you live with yourself knowing this?" I don't know any real life examples, but it's basically that. Somebody digs into some celebrity's past, finds something messed up, and tries to ruin their reputation and their career, simply because they found something somebody did in 10 years prior. And we're not perfect. We're not living our everyday lives being without mistakes. People make mistakes. Some things happen. Sometimes they get recorded. Sometimes they get put on the internet, and that's unfortunate. But by taking what they did 10 years ago, which they have no control over, because it was 10 years ago and now it's on the internet, it's everywhere. By taking that and bringing it to the future, their now selves, which they are most definitely different, you're trying to end the career they they fought so hard to get, their reputation that they tried to change since then, and you're trying to taint their image of the now them with the before them. you know. And it doesn't have to be a specific one person, you know. It's a group, or maybe a group of people, a way of thinking, um, or such. How does Ross suggest we address someone who has made a mistake or said something offensive? Well, as she said with the example of her uncle Ross, was it her uncle? I forget his name. Was his uncle? Was her uncle? Um, he said something really offensive about Mexicans and stealing jobs. And instead of calling him out and saying, "Hey, that's really offensive. Why would you think that way? That's messed up. That's fucked up." You know, instead of saying that, she organized thoughts in her head. She organized a question. She told him. She wasn't calling him in or calling him out. She was calling on him. She was saying, basically, I know you. I know how you are. I know what you would do in a situation that where race or gender didn't matter. I know you. Why would you think this way? You know, is this really how you think? You know, like how am I to believe that that same person thinks like this? And she didn't call him out. She didn't call him in. Instead, she called on him for him to rethink what he said, and rethink what thoughts he has on that opinion. So that way, whatever he follows with, whatever answer he follows with, is how he really thinks. Do you think there are situations where calling someone out is necessary? Nowadays, it's really a thin line. I can't say, like she said, you have to do a self-assessment of yourself before you can say, oh, I'm gonna call that person in. You know, I'm gonna embrace forgiveness. I I simply don't have that type of forgiveness in me for some people or some groups. Um, I don't mean to bring politics in it, but you know, with current politics, I simply wouldn't be able to call them in and say, I forgive you. You know, so I think if somebody did, to answer the question, I think if somebody did something really messed up, that definitely deserves jail time. But see, then it's kind of hard, because that one question, or that one example she brought up of that person who called that person in, who killed his mother. Um, it wasn't necessary to call them out, and they called them in instead, and it was way more effective than calling them out. But I think it's two sides of the same coin. You can call them out, you can call them in. One way is more effective than the other, but every situation has a calling in or calling out. So it's just how you approach it. But I think calling out and calling in are always going to be equally as necessary. I can't really think of a single situation where it would be especially effective, because you can do both. But share an example from your life where you called someone out. How could you have called them in? I think the first thing that came to my head is, I don't want to get too personal, but my dad used to drink a lot, and when I was little, I used to call him out a lot on that, and say, oh, I hate that you drink, or I hate that you do this, I hate that you do that. I hate it. And you know, I don't know how a parent thinks, but I'm sure when you hear your child of a young age telling you, oh, you hate this, you hate that, it's really hurtful, and it doesn't make you want to change. It just makes you feel bad, which will kind of and my guess, feed into what already is making you do that. But I was young, so I don't know how I could have called them in, but I know that nowadays, how I think now, I could have, you know, been there for him, asked him how he was, why he would do that, and what brought him to that point, and if there was any way to help him. I don't know if that really answered the question, but that's the only example I can really think of. But anyways, yes.